Here's what nobody tells you about the Vietnam War. Everyone talks about how terrifying the SAS was in the jungle, but there's one force the Viet Cong feared way more, and it wasn't even close. The British SAS has this legendary reputation: silent killers, masters of the jungle, invisible ghosts that could take you out before you even knew they were there. And yeah, they were absolutely dangerous. But when the Viet Cong, a North Vietnamese army, talked about the forces that kept them up at night, that made them abandon entire regions, that changed how they fought the war, they weren't talking about the SAS. They were talking about the Americans. And today we're going to break down exactly why that was the case, because the answer isn't what most people think.
So here's the thing that confuses people. The SAS were incredibly effective in jungle warfare. They proved it in Malaya, they proved it in Borneo, and their small unit tactics were basically perfect for the kind of war Vietnam turned into. They moved quietly, struck hard, and disappeared. They were exactly what you'd want in that environment. Meanwhile, the Americans? They were loud, they were big, they used massive amounts of firepower. They weren't subtle at all. From a tactical perspective, it seems like the Americans were doing everything wrong for jungle warfare. So how could they possibly be more feared than the masters of stealth and ambush tactics? This is where most people get the story completely backward. They assume that in jungle warfare, the quieter and sneakier you are, the more dangerous you become. And while that's true to a point, it misses something absolutely critical about what actually terrifies your enemy in war. It's not just about being deadly, it's about being inescapable.
Let's start with the most obvious difference: scale. And I'm not just talking about troop numbers. I'm talking about the entire concept of what these forces could actually do. The SAS operated in small teams, usually 4 to 6 men, sometimes a bit more, but rarely. Their whole strategy was built around staying hidden, gathering intelligence, and striking targets of opportunity. They were surgical, precise. They'd hit a supply depot, take out a few enemy soldiers, and vanish back into the jungle. For the enemy, encountering the SAS was terrifying, absolutely, but it was also rare. The odds of running into an SAS patrol on any given day were pretty low. Now compare that to the American presence in Vietnam. At the peak of the war, there were over 500,000 American troops in country. 500,000! They weren't operating in tiny teams scattered across the jungle. They were running massive operations that involved tens of thousands of soldiers at once. Operation Junction City? That involved around 30,000 American troops. 30,000! That's not a patrol. That's an army.
And here's what that meant for the Viet Cong and NVA. When the Americans decided to come for your region, they didn't send a 4-man team. They sent thousands of soldiers, supported by helicopters, jets, artillery, and every piece of military hardware you can imagine. They would literally surround entire areas, tens of square miles, and then systematically sweep through them. There was no hiding. There was no waiting them out. They had the manpower and resources to just keep coming. Think about that from the perspective of a Viet Cong fighter. An SAS team might kill a few of your guys if they stumble across your position. Scary, sure, but an American operation, that could wipe out your entire unit, your entire base, your entire network in that region. The scale of destruction wasn't even comparable. The Americans built this massive infrastructure throughout South Vietnam. They constructed huge air bases, deep water ports, artillery fire bases, supply depots, the whole 9 yards. This wasn't a small, elite force operating on the margins. This was a full-scale military occupation with the logistics to back it up. They could sustain operations indefinitely. They could rotate fresh troops in. They could keep the pressure on month after month after month.
The SAS were dangerous, but they were a needle in a haystack.
The Americans were the haystack itself, and it was on fire. But scale alone doesn't tell the whole story, because the real terror factor with American forces was the absolutely insane amount of firepower they could bring to bear. And I mean insane. Let's talk about Operation Masher, which later got renamed Operation White Wing. This was early in the war, January to March of 1966. The Americans were trying to clear Viet Cong forces out of Binh Dinh province. During this single operation, U.S. forces fired 132,000 artillery rounds. 132,000! That's not a typo. That's just the artillery. On top of that, they flew thousands of air sorties, dropping bombs and napalm and rockets on enemy positions. The SAS didn't have artillery support like that. They couldn't call in airstrikes on that scale. Their whole approach was about avoiding detection, which meant avoiding the kind of massive fire missions that would give away their position. The Americans? They didn't care about giving away their position. They wanted you to know exactly where they were, because once you knew where they were, you had two choices: run or get obliterated.
Here's a specific example of how this played out. Let's say you're a Viet Cong company commander. You set up base camp deep in the jungle. You've got tunnels, supply caches, fighting positions. You feel relatively safe because the jungle is thick and you've got good camouflage. Then one day, an American patrol spots your position. Within minutes, not hours, minutes, that patrol has called in artillery. Shells start raining down. Then helicopters show up with more troops and door gunners laying down suppressing fire. Then jets scream overhead dropping 500-pound bombs. Your entire base camp, the one you spent months building, is gone in less than an hour. Everyone who didn't run fast enough is dead or wounded. That's not theoretical. That happened over and over and over again throughout the war. The Americans had this doctrine of overwhelming firepower. If they found you, they didn't try to match your numbers. They just called in everything they had and erased you from the map.
And it wasn't just random. The Americans developed this whole combined arms approach where helicopters, artillery, jets, and ground troops all worked together in a coordinated system. They called it air mobile warfare. Helicopters would drop troops into landing zones. Those troops would flush out enemy forces. When they made contact, gunships and jets would hammer the enemy position, while artillery provided continuous fire support. Then fresh troops would helicopter in to cut off escape routes. The Viet Cong had never faced anything like it. Neither had the North Vietnamese army. Yes, they were tough. Yes, they were determined. But there's only so much you can do when the enemy can literally summon explosions from the sky whenever they want. The SAS might kill you quietly in the night. The Americans would announce their presence by turning your entire grid square into a crater.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting, because some people might argue that, okay, fine, the Americans had scale and firepower, but that's not the same as being elite. That's just having more stuff. What about actual special operations? What about the kind of sneaky behind enemy lines stuff that the SAS was famous for? Well, let me introduce you to MACV SOG, the Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group. And before you think that sounds boring, let me tell you, the name was deliberately boring. It was a cover. These guys were running some of the most dangerous, most secretive missions of the entire war. MACV SOG was a joint special operations unit that pulled from the Army Special Forces, Navy SEALs, Air Force, and even the CIA. Their mission list included cross-border operations into Laos and Cambodia, which were officially neutral countries.
They did reconnaissance, sabotage, prisoner snatches, direct action raids, psychological warfare operations, you name it. And here's the key thing. They weren't just doing reconnaissance like a traditional special forces unit. They were actively hunting enemy forces in their own backyard. They would insert small teams, usually 6 to 12 men, deep into enemy-controlled territory, sometimes hundreds of miles behind enemy lines, and just wreak havoc. The casualty rates for SOG teams were incredibly high. Some estimates put the casualty rate at around 100%, meaning if you served with SOG long enough, you were statistically guaranteed to be killed or wounded. These guys knew they were on suicide missions, and they went anyway. That's a different level of aggression than what the SAS was doing. And they were effective, insanely effective. There are claims that MACV-SOG had kill ratios of over 100 to 1 against enemy forces. 100 to 1. Now take those numbers with a grain of salt, because kill ratios are always disputed and probably inflated. But even if the real number was half that, even if it was a quarter of that, it's still absurdly high.
The North Vietnamese Army put bounties on SOG team members, specific bounties. They wanted these guys dead or captured so badly that they were willing to pay serious money for it. That tells you everything you need to know about how much the NVA feared them. SOG teams would use every dirty trick in the book. They'd dress in enemy uniforms to cause confusion. They'd set up ambushes on the Ho Chi Minh Trail and just shred enemy convoys. They'd call in arc-light strikes, which were B-52 carpet bombing runs on enemy bases they discovered during recon missions. One team finds your base, and 3 hours later, 30 tons of bombs are falling on your head. So when people say the SAS were the elite jungle fighters, I'd argue MACV-SOG was doing everything the SAS did, but deeper in enemy territory, with even less support, taking even bigger risks. The Americans absolutely had elite special operations capability. It just doesn't get talked about as much because it was classified for decades after the war. Here's another factor that made American forces so feared. They never stopped. The SAS would run an operation and then cool back. That's just how they operated. They'd gather intelligence, maybe conduct a raid, and then extract. They didn't have the numbers or logistics to stay in an area permanently. The Americans, they could set up a fire base in your region and just stay there for months. They'd run patrols every single day. They'd send out ambushes every single night. They'd fly reconnaissance missions constantly. There was no break, no pause, no waiting for them to leave. This was the American attrition strategy. The idea was to just grind down enemy forces through constant pressure, kill their fighters faster than they could replace them, destroy their supplies faster than they could bring in new ones, make it impossible for them to rest or regroup. Now, we know the attrition strategy ultimately didn't win the war. The North Vietnamese and Viet Cong could replace casualties because they had an entire country supporting them, plus backing from China and the Soviet Union. But that doesn't mean it wasn't terrifying to experience. Imagine knowing that every single day, American patrols are going to come through your area. Every night, they might set up an ambush on the trail you use. Any minute, a helicopter could spot your position and call in an airstrike. That constant, grinding pressure was psychologically devastating. The SAS were like a shark, dangerous when they showed up, but they didn't show up that often. The Americans were like being underwater. The pressure never went away.
So let's pull all of this together and get to the heart of why the Viet Cong and NVA feared American forces more than the SAS. It came down to one simple factor: inevitability. When the SAS came after you, it was personal, it was skilled, it was terrifying, but it was also something you might avoid. You might never encounter them. You might get lucky. When the Americans came after you, there was no luck involved.
They were everywhere. They had the numbers to search every valley and every hillside. They had the helicopters to insert troops anywhere within minutes. They had the firepower to level any position you tried to defend. They had the logistics to keep operations running for as long as it took. And they had special operations forces that were just as elite as the SAS, but backed up by the entire American military machine.
From the Viet Cong or NVA soldiers' perspective, the Americans weren't just an enemy. They were a force of nature. You could hide from the SAS. You couldn't hide from B-52s carpet bombing the jungle. You could ambush an SAS patrol if you were smart and lucky. You couldn't ambush 30,000 American soldiers supported by artillery and airstrikes. The fear wasn't about individual skill. Both the SAS and American Special Forces had that. The fear was about scale, persistence, and overwhelming power. The Americans could be everywhere at once. They could hit you from any direction, and once they found you, they had the firepower to erase you from existence. That's why captured documents and prisoner interrogations from the war consistently showed that Viet Cong and NVA forces were more concerned about American operations than British ones. That's why the North Vietnamese specifically developed tactics to counter American firepower and mobility. That's why they built extensive tunnel systems and moved operations into Cambodia and Laos, trying to get away from the main American presence.
Look, this isn't about disrespecting the SAS. They were and are one of the most elite military units in the world. Their jungle warfare skills were absolutely top tier. If you ran into an SAS patrol in Vietnam, you were having a very bad day. But fear in warfare isn't just about skill. It's about what an enemy can actually do to you. And the Americans could do things to the Viet Cong and NVA that the SAS simply couldn't match because of scale and resources. The SAS were the scalpel. Precise, deadly, elegant. The Americans were the sledgehammer. Brutal, overwhelming, inescapable. And when you're a guerrilla fighter trying to survive in the jungle, the sledgehammer is what keeps you up at night.
The Americans brought firepower that could flatten entire regions. They brought logistics that let them operate anywhere indefinitely. They brought special operations units like MACV SOG that went toe-to-toe with the best the enemy had. And they brought sheer numbers that meant nowhere was truly safe. That combination, scale plus firepower plus elite capabilities plus persistence, that's what made American forces the most feared in Vietnam. Not because they were better soldiers than the SAS individually, but because they represented a type of warfare that was simply more threatening to the enemy's survival. If you want to see more Vietnam War content like this, join our community.